What is up, everybody? Welcome back to episode number 4 of College Football Coast to Coast with myself, Pigskin Pete, and my esteemed colleague, the world famous college football analyst, Mark Rogers TV. How you doing, Mark?
I'm not quite there at amazing and fantastic. Let's go with I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic. Hopeful and optimistic. I think that's pretty good.
I think that works. I'd take it. Hopeful and optimistic it's at least positive. That's a glass half full type of thing.
And that's probably true for most fans outside of the Big 12.
Yeah. Well, the Big 10 fans are definitely still hopeful and optimistic because they haven't played yet. The Big 12 is glass half empty at this point. What is going on over there?
And maybe you could put the Pac-12 fans in the same bucket as the Big 10 fans, but maybe they know better and they're not.
They're smarter than that, huh?
Yeah. Especially at Stanford.
Sorry, guys. We are about 10 minutes late today. I know everybody was looking at their phones, just awaiting for 12 o'clock for the College Football Coast to Coast show. I'm not going to put Mark in this boat. I had some technical difficulties, so we're 10 minutes late. But thank you all for joining us. I see people hopping in the chat here. Michael Sachs Jr., Slim Shady Canes, how you doing, brother? Big week for you and myself. Neo, Goose Sports, John Serrain. Before we get started here and talking about some of these interesting games from last week, Mark, of course, I want to do like we do every show and have you let everybody know where they can find you other than here on Mondays at 12 o'clock.
We've got a Patreon page, so join our Voice of College Football community. I will be leaving that link in the chat here in just a second. I always forget to copy the link before we get started here, but I'll leave that in the chat. The typical Mark Rogers TV fare there of all sorts of great discussion, debate, analysis, call-in shows, and predictions of my top 25 that actually makes sense. And again, the predictions, we're hanging on for one other week with that optimism and hope. There, Pigskin Pete, 9-5 against the spread on Saturday brings me to 27-17 for the year.
I'm still at about a 500 on the year. However, I had a good week this last weekend. I was 4-2, I think.
Nice
on Saturday, and then I did pretty well in a couple of NFL games too over the weekend. But the big win for me was I took Ole Miss on the money line to beat Kentucky at plus 210, and so I hit big on that one. That was my big winner of the weekend.
Yeah, that's a good selection. Yeah. I remind people those upsets are there. They are there. And again, we had them last week. Pitt was a 14-point favorite against NC State. And of course, Oklahoma more than a touchdown against Iowa State. So they were out there. There were a few others.
Yes. Hello, Luke Walker, Alan V, and Country Tiger. How you guys doing? Thank you all for joining us today. All right, so we just talked about a little bit about Ole Miss and Kentucky. Was that big of a shock to you?
Not a shock. I thought Kentucky was the better team, but Ole Miss can certainly scheme, and they can. I guess they got a field goal kicker that can make extra points. That helps. Nothing worse than the dreaded missed extra point in overtime, and then you're shaking in your boots thinking, the defense really needs to hold them out because we're going to lose this game. And that's what happened to Kentucky. They also had a 2-touchdown lead in the fourth quarter that they blew. I am surprised that Kentucky gave up those kind of points and yardage, because I expected much of the Kentucky defense this year. And I think they pretty much held Auburn to a respectable, not necessarily the point total at 29, but their offense didn't help them out in that game. They played pretty good defense against Auburn. Then in this Ole Miss game, maybe this is showing us something about the Rebels, putting up those kind of point totals and yardage totals against Florida, now Kentucky, to what were supposed to be pretty good defenses.
Well, we'll talk about Florida in a minute. I'm not so sure Florida's defense is very good. However, I did think Kentucky's was. Again, like you said, this is something we're going to see week to week. Lane Kiffin he knows how to scheme the offense up and expose some of the weaknesses on these defenses. So he's going to put up a lot of yards and a lot of points every single week. Of course, we said the same thing about Mike Leach. That didn't work out so well against Arkansas, though. But Ole Miss has a lot of weapons. I think Ole Miss, if we're comparing Ole Miss and Mississippi State, two high flying offenses, I think Ole Miss has more talent and skill on their offense than Mississippi State and Mike Leach does. So Mike Leach does it strictly through schematics, but I think that the talent gap is different between Ole Miss and Mississippi State's offense.
They're also not running things quite as different there at Ole Miss is what they were doing before with those two quarterbacks and spreading the field and doing all those same concepts of let's hurry up and let's get it to playmakers on the outside and let's throw it 40, 45 times and run 70 plays and all that, as much as Mississippi State is having to go through a transition. And KJ Costello certainly did not run that offense at Stanford, although they're not as grinded out, run the fullback, the two tight ends at Stanford as you typically would think. They've started to morph that way, but it's been a bit of a shock for KJ Costello at Mississippi State running Mike Leach's offense as opposed to the Ole Miss players and the two quarterback system getting used to Lane Kiffin.
And the Mike Leach style of offense requires that the quarterback be extremely accurate. And Costello was week one and wasn't so much this past weekend. So that makes all the difference when you're passing it 50 and 60 times a game. You have to hit the receiver with the ball. I mean, it goes without saying. Nonetheless, Ole Miss looks like a pretty good team. Again, another team that's great on offense, but not a little bit shaky on defense, sort of like a Florida. I was making a point yesterday talking to somebody about Florida's defense. Florida starting out the season a lot looking like LSU did last year. And I'm not saying that Florida is the 2019 LSU Tigers, because they're not. That was an all-time great team. But what I mean by that is they came out of the gate offensively last year. LSU did, hitting on all cylinders, but their defense was slow to get started. So can we see the same thing from Florida this year? Because as the season went on, especially as we got into the latter part of the season and towards the playoffs and the SEC championship game, LSU's defense started playing on a much higher level at the end of the season. If Florida can somehow find a way to improve on defense the way that LSU did last year, they're going to be a handful come to the end of the season.
I don't think Florida's wide receivers are quite at the caliber of LSU's. The ones that they had, and we saw Justin Jefferson for Minnesota tear it up against the Houston Texans yesterday. So there you go. Just one of their four last year from that LSU team moving on to the NFL and instantly becoming a playmaker. I don't know that Florida's quite at that. They've got an array of wide receiver, and they had a lot of those guys leave to go to the next level as well. But I don't think I would take LSU's wide receivers in 2019 over Florida's in 2020. I also don't think that Florida has that one guy like Edwards-Helaire that's as good. And then defensively, though, I think you draw comparisons that I could see coming to fruition as well. Yeah, struggling on defense, but having the players that can make it work in the long run, near the end of the season, the stretch drive. Even when Florida didn't have very good teams that were barely winning bad Eastern divisions in the SEC, they had exceptional defense. Their defense isn't as good right now and hasn't been the last couple of years than it was under Muschamp and McElwain. But they've got the players and the talent to pull it together. So I could see them getting things together on defense later.
Thank you, Wilkie. She says, in a couple of years, Mike Leach will be making big waves in the SEC. That's going to depend on his recruiting to the style he plays. This is a very similar situation I've said to Georgia Tech, completely overhauling the offensive system that you were running and not having the guys that you necessarily need to do that. So far, he's doing okay considering what he had. And I'm not saying he had bad players, but he hasn't had the type of players that he would recruit to run that type of system. I think you'll see him getting a lot of players out of the transfer portal and recruiting to his strength. And yeah, and within a couple of years, he could be a headache for somebody. I still don't think Mike Leach is the type of the coach to compete with the LSUs and the Alabamas. And in certain years, the Auburns of the West. I mean, it's a tough division to be competing in, but he will be a guy that can definitely ruin some seasons for some teams.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the way for Mike Leach at Mississippi State. I think he's going to be that team, that program that, bingo, ruins seasons for other teams, but then he's going to turn around and lose to, I'm not talking about this particular year, but yeah, maybe pull off the win against the LSU, the Auburn, and then turn around 2 weeks later and lose to Kentucky, lose to Missouri, whomever it is. I just don't see it. Dan Mullen was just it. If we respect what Dan Mullen's doing at Florida, Dan Mullen was at Mississippi State for 10 years. Couldn't get it done to that level.
Yeah, Luke Walker is saying it's not that close to Georgia Tech. At least Mississippi State threw the ball ever. Well, I'm not comparing the two. What I'm saying is a similar situation. It's just a complete overhaul of the offense. I'm not saying it's close to Georgia Tech, but
no, they threw the ball.
Yeah, right. The next one, Pitt and NC State. That was the upset of the week to me. I thought that Pitt. Well, I still think that Pitt is a legit top 10 defense in the country. They struggled a little bit in the first half. And by the way, NC State, they're averaging over 30 points a game after 3 games, Mark. I'm not sold on NC State saying they're a good team or anything, but this is classic vintage Pitt. Pitt beats really good teams, and then they'll go out and you know what? You remember the Clemsoning thing?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. So that was Clemson, and Clemson would beat a top 10 team and then go out and lose the next week to an unranked team, and that was Clemsoning. Well, now we can call it pitting because they do this every year. They beat a highly ranked team or they come out strong and they play these top 10 teams tough, and then they go out and lose to an NC State, and that's what they did this week. I still think Pitt is probably going to end up winning 7 or 8 games out of their 11-game schedule. They've got a tough road. They've got to play Notre Dame, Miami, and Clemson still on their schedule. So they have the toughest road left in the ACC. They certainly couldn't afford to lose to NC State, in my opinion. If they had any hopes of making it to Charlotte, I think those hopes went out the window this past Saturday.
Yeah, you can't lose that game and then compete for the ACC second slot to get to the championship game when you've got Notre Dame in the league now, especially. I just think that Pitt-NC State game is just the ACC. I don't think the ACC has changed. I got to see something different. And that something different this year might just be the presence of Notre Dame being a second seed that can play Clemson in the championship game. But I've heard all sorts of people talk about, and I took some calls last night about the ACC being better, and look at the ACC. Isn't the ACC better? Better against who? We've got nothing to judge that by, number one. Number two, who are those teams that are emerging? Well, wait until Miami plays some games, and I'm not expecting a win this week, and I don't think they have to win to show me that they're better or that they filled in some kind of second tier. But somebody was trying to make, a number of people were trying to make some correlation between the ACC and the Big Ten. And to me, you don't have Penn State, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa level play there. And maybe you do this year. We'll see, but I have yet to see it. North Carolina beating Boston College when they had to hold off a 2-point conversion late in the game and beating Syracuse by 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. That's not showing me anything yet out of those teams that have that chance to fill that gap, that second tier gap.
Thank you. Definition 409. Texas A&M and Jimbo has tricked me. Well, Jimbo Fisher tricked the entire university into paying him $80 million. So yeah, he tricked everybody. Definition 409. Uncle Lou, thank you, sir. He says, can I get a Kentucky update from Mark?
Yeah, Kentucky's an excellent program. They're 1 game behind my projection.
Okay.
They're a missed extra point behind my projection. I picked them to lose to Auburn. Did pick them to beat Ole Miss. Wasn't shocked. Yeah, I'll give you an update on my predictions. 27-17 against the spread. Pick all the top 25 games. That'll put everything into context. But there's the Kentucky. There's the Kentucky update. There you go.
So I think what Uncle Lou wants to know is, do you still think that Kentucky's winning the East? I think that's
they got to win 8 straight now.
Yeah,
they got to win 8 straight. Make an extra point in overtime.
It's possible, huh? It's possible, is what you're saying. There's a chance. There's a chance.
Maybe I actually, I could be Athlon, Street and Smith, whoever else throws out magazines and says Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma in the playoff.
That sounds like
and you basically you're safe. And you do that. And if that's what you truly believe, I've got no issue with that, because I've been safe in the past and said, okay, here's your playoff, and it's going to look fine at the end when I get 3 out of 4. But at the same time, I remind everybody 20 to 25% of the games are upsets. So I'm looking for the upset. So when I throw out my game by game predictions and people are like, you're crazy, that's not going to happen, that's not going to happen, TCU beat Texas, and NC State beat Pitt, and on and on. There were like 3 or 4 double-digit favorites that lost.
Sure.
Just Saturday.
If it were that easy, then all these people in the comment section would be millionaires right now. They wouldn't be here bothering with us. They'd be in Tahiti or something.
Exactly.
Speaking of OU, I'm glad we brought that up because Oklahoma. So I know the Big Ten hasn't come in yet. The Pac-12 hasn't come in yet. I mean, Florida State clearly is the most disappointing team in football. But as far as nobody really had expectations for Florida State. Did I say Florida? I meant Florida State. Florida State's clearly the biggest disappointment, but they didn't have any expectations. Oklahoma, on the other hand, had expectations of making the playoffs like they've done, 3 out of the past 5 years or whatever it is. Clearly, that's not happening this year. They're a part of a bigger problem in the Big 12. They're losing to the top tier teams in the Big 12 are losing consistently to the lower tier teams in the Big 12, and it seems to be an epidemic. The Big 12 at this point is not making the playoffs. But what did you take out of this loss? The last time that Oklahoma lost 2 regular season games in a row, do you know what year that was, Mark?
2 regular season games in a row.
Yes.
I believe they came out of the chute in, what year was that? 2016. They lost to Houston before they had to play Ohio State the next week and lost, unless they had a early season like UTEP game. I thought that they lost to Houston and Ohio State back-to-back weeks in 2016.
Well, what I heard today was 1999 was the last time that happened.
That they lost back-to-back games?
In the regular season.
Might be back-to-back conference games. I'm going to look that up in just a second.
Anyway, the bottom line is it doesn't happen very often. Spencer Rattler was my preseason Heisman favorite. Or hell, he was my Heisman favorite even after week 1 when they went out there and demolished whoever they played. Nobody State that first week, and he scored whatever it was, 4 touchdowns in the first 2 quarters.
Oh. There was a Louisiana Monroe game in between those two, Houston and Ohio State. So they were 1 and 2 at that point. So
yes.
1999, that was Bob Stoops' first year.
Yeah, so 21 years ago was the last time that Oklahoma lost 2 regular season games in a row. So they're out. Look, the Big 12, the perception of the Big 12 is already down this year, just from what we've seen already. There's no way a 2-loss Big 12 champion's getting in. I mean, Oklahoma could run the table. I still don't see them making the playoffs with 2 losses.
You know who should really feel good about this? Everybody's looking at the Pac-12, and I get it, of course, if they can get an undefeated team, but they're only going to play 7 games. So maybe they have virus issues and it's 6 games. Who should really feel good about this is the SEC, because the second place team in the SEC might be playing in the playoff.
I think they will. Of course, we have to see what happens in the Big Ten as well. If you have, I don't know. There's a bunch of different scenarios, but there could be 2 teams in the Big Ten that are good enough to play in the playoffs as well. We'll have to see. So Oklahoma,
games.
What's that?
But with less games, I think the SEC comes in with the most respect, the best teams, and they're going to play within 1 game the most games. So their second place team at 9-2 or 8-2 is going to look better maybe than a Big Ten team that went 6-2.
Definition 409, thank you, sir, says Oklahoma won't lose another regular season game. I'd be willing to bet at this point that that's probably not the case. Is it possible? Yes.
Oh, if you told me that they wouldn't lose another game, I wouldn't be surprised. If you said that they're going to lose a game, I wouldn't be surprised. But if you said you got to make a prediction on this, I'm saying they're going to lose another game.
I am too. Particularly since they're probably going to have to play Texas twice in that scenario. If they beat Texas, they play this week, don't they?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. Spoiler alert. I'm picking Texas to beat Oklahoma this week.
Well, since I picked Kentucky and Texas to win divisions or conference championships, yes, I'm picking Texas as well because I picked them to win the Big 12.
Oklahoma's defense is so bad. It's really embarrassing how bad it is. And Texas, I mean, I know they lost to TCU, but Texas still, I think they're a better squad this year than Oklahoma on both sides of the ball. I mean, as a whole.
Well, if they hang on to the ball at the goal line, they would have beat TCU.
Right. So anyway, we'll see. Anything can happen in the Big 12. I don't know that I would bet it and I'll talk about this tomorrow with Uncle Lou on the Lunch Money Show. We'll talk about the betting lines, but I don't know that I would bet it because the Big 12 is a hot mess, and it really appears that outside of maybe Kansas, anybody can beat anybody at this point. So,
Sure, it does.
so I'm not going to mess with it. Speaking of Texas, we just mentioned that Texas and TCU. That was a game that went over to overtime, didn't it? I didn't watch the game.
No, it did not.
Okay, so what did it just come down to the very end there?
Yeah, Texas, 2 minutes left. They hit the ball right at the goal line. The running back extended the ball, got knocked out of his hands. It wasn't like he was diving for the pylon. I get that, and most of the time it works out for the player. But he's in he's in a goal line pileup, and he's trying to extend the ball. And it's not fourth down. Fourth down, you need to do that. It's like first down. He's doing that. Ball gets knocked out of his hands. Fumble at the goal line. Game over.
Does Oklahoma State have a legit conversation to be the best team in the Big 12 this year? I think that they do.
Well, they haven't shown us that yet, but
nobody
what everybody expected. Yeah, so Big 12 fans looking for a team, it would be Oklahoma State, and it would also be Baylor. So those are the two teams that are unscathed. But to see either one of them run through the deck in the Big 12, I don't see it. But Oklahoma State would, to me, have the best chance of doing it.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Moving on to a game from last week that was very exciting. Florida and South Carolina. Now I watched I streamed the game, so I watched the game in its entirety. And Florida's offense, we talked about this earlier, looks as good as advertised. The real story here to me is South Carolina. I didn't expect South Carolina to be good offensively, and they're really kind of average offensively, which is to be expected. But the running back that they have for South Carolina, he was balling. I mean, he was having a career game. Smith, the wide receiver, was also having a great game. Colin Hill did not play bad, the quarterback there. The real question here is not the play on the field. It's the management of the clock and the play calling. No urgency. They're down 2 scores with what was it, 4 or 5 minutes left. They're down 14 points, and they take almost that entire time off the clock to make one drive down to score. There's no urgency, no hurrying to the line, nothing. And so they finally do go down, and they get themselves between a rock and a hard place, and then they turn the ball over.
Will Muschamp was asked about that after the game because, it was like a 7-minute and 40-second drive.
Yeah, out of 8 minutes left or something.
Because they threw the ball down 2 scores, and Shi Smith, who you alluded to, had a big game, 12 or 13 catches. He did drop a pass in the end zone that would have got them within a touchdown with the onside kick with I think like a minute 20, they would have been in something in that range, like a reasonable range to possibly pull it off. But he was asked about that, and his response was that they just ran their offense. Well, there's a problem running your offense run your offense in the first quarter.
That's the most Will Muschamp thing to say, is that we just ran our offense. Yeah, well, you need to run we're down by 2 scores with 8 minutes left offense, not your regular offense. That's the point.
Yes.
And they have Bobo as their offensive coordinator, and he was quoted as saying before the game, and this could be taken out of context, I don't know, I'm paraphrasing here, is that he said basically he feels like these hurry up offenses have ruined the fundamentals in college football. So he's not worried about playing fast. He wants to play fundamentally. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a good thing to say, but when the game is on the line and you're still in it, technically, there's got to be urgency there. And so what that tells me is that he's not practicing any sort of hurry up style of offense in practice, no matter what the game situation, which is alarming and should be troubling to the South Carolina fans.
So either choose to play like that all the time and make that part of your strategy to wear out the defense, run up tempo, not allow for them to, even though there's an allowance now in terms of time for them to make a personnel change if needed, that sort of thing. Or if you make a personnel change, they make a personnel change kind of deal. But the game is run against the clock. So the team that's got the most points when the clock hits 0 wins the game. Therefore, you're running against the clock if you're losing the game. You're battling the clock and the opponent. Therefore, it would be a wise maneuver to have an offense that can adapt to the game situation and run plays in a up speed tempo. It shouldn't even be explained. Have to be explained. It's a ridiculous statement to make.
It is a ridiculous statement to make. Definition 409 sends 2 super chats. The first one says, take Florida. It's free money this week. And I'm going to get to that when we start talking about, we may as well get to it now. Florida came out as a 6-point favorite.
Okay.
Over Texas A&M, which I think is a ridiculous line. As soon as I saw the line, I already took it. And within 10 minutes of the line coming out, I had already placed my bet on it.
Okay.
So I'm taking Florida. I think Florida will win by more than 6 points. I think it's a ridiculous spread. It could be a trap. Usually when it looks too good to be true, it usually is. And there's a reason that the line is that low. Mark, I see you shaking your head there.
I'll have to think that one over. I would love for that to have pushed past a touchdown and taken Texas A&M. But yeah, the way the two teams are playing right now, absolutely. Florida's putting up points all over the place. And even though Texas A&M is going to be a better defense than what they faced both weeks, they're still so proficient on offense. I see them scoring in the high 30s in this game, and Texas A&M looks like, it looks like a 37-24 game, something like that. Texas A&M's talented, but man,
I guess the game's on Kyle Field, but I don't know how much that matters in this year. Because I don't know how many fans are allowing, but anyways, it's not going to be the advantage that it normally would. I mean, that's obviously a very loud, very tough place to play, but they're not going to have that much of an issue with that this year. So
they were at 22,000 against Vandy.
Yeah, there's a big difference between whatever it is, 90,000 and 22,000 as far as the noise goes. But I agree with you. He also says, answer the phone, Mark. It's your final notice for them to sell you an extended warranty on your car you no longer have.
Man, whoever that is, they know me because they do try to do that for cars that I had like 3 cars ago.
It happens to everybody. Yeah. And some people are actually stupid enough to buy a warranty on a car that they don't have anymore. So I guess that's the reason that they do it. All right. So I think we're in agreement pretty much on the coaching situation at South Carolina. I mean, I see I want to say the light at the end of the tunnel. If you're a Gamecock fan, you see the light at the end of the tunnel because I don't think Will Muschamp will survive much longer the way things are going there. If you're a Clemson fan, you want the light to go away because as a Clemson fan, I hope they give him a lifetime contract.
If I'm in the administration in South Carolina and I care about football, I view us differently than Vanderbilt and Missouri in that division. I think, why can't we be Florida, Tennessee, Georgia? Not tomorrow, but we've got 80-some thousand seats. They pack out. We've got a committed fan base. We've got money. We've got talent all around us. We're in South Carolina, just like Clemson is. We were beating them 7 or 8 years ago. We're in the same division. We've got access to this Atlanta talent, Florida talent. Why can't we do it? Why can't we hire the right guy?
You're preaching to the choir, right? Sometimes I feel like I'm more optimistic about how good South Carolina could be than the actual fans are themselves. And believe me, I could go on for an hour about this, about the type of coaches that they hire. Well, the last 3 have all been recycled coaches. They don't have the vision to go out and get a Scott Frost or a Mike Norvell or a Luke Fickell at Cincinnati. They want the guys that already have a pedigree who are on the downside of their career. Well, I don't know. Well, Muschamp didn't have a pedigree, but you know what I'm saying. But
as a coordinator, he did. Started
with Lou Holt, then it went to Spurrier. And believe me, Spurrier was a great coach. We all know that. And he won a bunch of games there. Still only won the division once, never won the conference. His really claim to fame was beating Clemson 5 years in a row. And then they go out and get a washed up coach who really didn't have a great record at Florida and Will Muschamp. If you can't cut it at Florida with Florida's talent, I don't know what makes you think you can cut it at South Carolina with South Carolina's type talent. So anyway, my point is, and everyone says about South Carolina, well, who are they going to get? Well, who are they going to get? They can't get it. Nobody wants that job. Sure. Do you think that a group of 5 coach wouldn't want that job? being in South Carolina, being in the heart of recruiting country, where you can recruit 4 or 5 elite recruiting states all around you. Clemson's doing it. There's no reason that South Carolina can't do it too, if they get the right guy in there.
I'm scanning the country. I'm not coming up with a location of a school that underachieves like South Carolina for decades. I'm not coming up with anyone else. Everybody else has an excuse. If Nebraska plays like South Carolina does for the next 20 years, they've got the excuse that they've got no players, and on and on and on. You can go anywhere. I just can't find it. Auburn wins, Texas A&M wins more than South Carolina. Everybody wins at times in other places that maybe are still underachieving at times. They still figure out a way to win. Tennessee wins. I know it's been a long time, but they did 10 years ago, 12 years ago. It's starting to become the distant past, but still, Tennessee's done it. Why can everybody else do it, at least at some point in their history, but not South Carolina ever? West Virginia's got no players, and they field really good teams.
And it's not like this is a school that doesn't care about football. They care.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The people are there.
They have a huge fan base. I mean, they're the biggest university in the state. They're double Clemson size as far as the amount of students they have. More than double. They have a stadium, a good venue. They have a rabid fan base. That if I'm the athletic director at South Carolina, I'm calling up Luke Fickell every day from now until they fire me, and I'm offering him as much money as he wants to come coach the team, within reason.
Yeah, he's probably the guy. If I come up with another one, I'll let you know, but that's a good choice.
That's a good choice, and I'm sure there's 2 or 3 other ones like him that would also be a good fit there. But no, what they'll do is they'll go out and they'll try to hire Hugh Freeze next, or somebody who's already been there and done that and hasn't really lived up to expectation at the previous school that they were at. So anyway, moving on from South Carolina, they are a problem for themselves, not for anybody else. Alabama, Texas A&M, we saw that was not surprising to me. Does Alabama look like the best team in the country, Mark?
Yes. They do. They're number 2 in my poll, but they look like the best team in the country. Or it's not a poll. It's my ranking.
I already recorded my ranking early this morning. It's coming out later on this afternoon. I have them, spoiler alert, at number 1. Yes, ahead of Clemson. I'm going based off of what I've seen this year, and they look better than Clemson so far as a whole. So,
Georgia's number 1 right now for me. They've got the best results.
That's the top 25 that actually makes sense, right?
Yeah, because it's based on the results.
Yes. KB, thank you, sir. Says, I love Clemson offense finally throwing across the middle and check down to running backs, inject that straight into my veins. Yes, we'll get to Clemson in a minute. We're going to talk about Clemson and Miami preview. I do agree with you. The Clemson's offense, especially the big 3, as I call them, Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, and Amari Rodgers, are all playing at a very high level. And actually, the offensive line is doing better than I thought they would so far this year. We need the number 2 and 3 receivers to be a little bit more of a threat, but I agree with you. The offense for Clemson is as good as anybody's in the country. That's not a debate, I don't think. Mark, do you want to debate that?
I'm not ready to debate that. I got to see them play somebody. Then we'll debate.
All right. So speaking of Clemson and Virginia, let's go ahead and preview that or review that game, as it will.
That's all yours. I didn't watch a play of that game.
All right. So the big knock on is that Clemson's defense looked bad. All right. Now, I agree. I did not like what I saw out of Clemson's defense on Saturday. You have to take into consideration, at least a little bit, the 2 key players on the defensive line that were not playing in this game. And that was Tyler Davis and Justin Foster. Probably the 2 best defensive linemen on the team. Now, Niles Pinckney's the old veteran in the middle there. He's a senior. The defensive line is full, and not just the defensive line. The entire defense is full of freshmen and sophomores. The linebacker position might be the most veteran group out of all of them, with Skalski and Jones. But anyway, they had a hard time getting pressure on Virginia. We're supposed to get both of those guys back this week. We're playing a bunch of young guys. I said before the season this was going to be a really talented defensive line with not much experience, and you're seeing that already. I also think that you have to at least give a little bit of credit to Virginia. I mean, Clemson won the game by 18 points, and they didn't even play very good. Virginia played a hell of a game and still struggled to score a lot of points in this game. What did they score? 20, what was it?
3.
23.
41-23.
So not a bad showing by Virginia. I think that we're not giving Virginia enough credit here. Having said that, if the defense shows up this Saturday that showed up last Saturday, there will be a problem in Death Valley, South Carolina, because Miami's offense is clearly better than Virginia's, and the quarterback is going to be a problem as a dual threat. So we'll see what happens. If the defense shows up this week that showed up last week, this game is going to come down to the wire.
So when that Clemson Virginia game was, I believe at one point 27-17 in the third quarter, I'm not guessing that you were worried about the outcome.
No.
But at that point in the game, looking at the first almost 3 quarters of play, did you think that Virginia was playing almost as well as Clemson? Was it a legit 27-17 game? Like if we didn't have jerseys on the players to determine this is Clemson versus Virginia, we're just watching a game A versus B. Like you're concerned about this game because this other team is playing almost as well as we are.
Well, there's a clear lopsidedness. Clemson's offense is on another level than Virginia's, so that's clear just by watching it. That Clemson's offense on another level. Defensively, I thought that Virginia was playing better than Clemson was. The game was never in doubt in my mind. The question was, are you going to beat them by 18 or are you going to beat them by 28, which is what the spread was. I said before the game, I thought they would cover the 28. It didn't take long, maybe midway through the second quarter, where I realized that was not probably going to happen, but I never worried about them dropping the game. No.
I took a poll last night of Miami fans, mostly Miami fans, and they're very reasonable Miami fans because I took a poll and they've got Miami winning. The poll was 27-4, so it's pretty much a certainty.
27-4. So you poll. So what you're saying is 31 people answered the poll.
Yes,
and 27 of them have them winning the game.
Yeah.
Wrong. Yeah. Here's what I'll say about Miami. We'll go ahead and start this. We'll start with the previews of coming up for this next week's game. We'll start with Clemson and Miami. What that's a great place to start, isn't it, Mark? Look, can Miami beat Clemson? Yes, Miami can beat Clemson. Anybody can lose on any given day. Is Miami better than Virginia? Yes, Miami's better than Virginia. Did Miami beat the crap out of Florida State? Yes, Miami beat the crap out of Florida State. Who else did they beat? UAB, and who's the other one they beat?
Louisville.
All right, Louisville, UAB, and Florida State. That's not the greatest sample size of all great sample sizes. And now, Clemson hasn't beat anybody that's that great either. I'd say Virginia is better than any of the teams that Miami beat so far. And look, this is Miami's Super Bowl. All right. That's the difference between these two programs right now. You can like it or love it. It doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is, this week, this is Miami's biggest game of the year. To Clemson, it's just another bump in the road on the way to another playoff and compete for another national championship. That's the mindset difference. Now, whoever wins this game isn't necessarily out of the playoff picture either, unless one of them gets completely blown out. Because let's say Miami loses, if they run the table and then somehow make it to the ACC championship and beat Clemson, they're in. If their only loss is a close regular season loss in Death Valley, but they're 11-1 ACC champs, they're in. Same thing with Clemson. Clemson could lose a close home game to Miami as long as they run the table and win the ACC champion. They still have Notre Dame to play. Then they would still get in. So this is not a death nail to either team. But what it is I think it's more important to Miami's stake to greatness than it is to Clemson's.
I said some of those same things recently that, and Miami fans don't necessarily like to hear it, that, yeah, it's a much bigger deal to them than it is to Clemson. These Clemson players, I know that they lost a lot, 4 offensive linemen in particular, best wide receiver. You could go on through the defense, Isaiah Simmons on through it. So it's not the exact same team. It's 2/3 of the same team. But these players, they're used to playing in much bigger games than this game. Like, this isn't a big deal. It shows up higher on the scale than Virginia and Wake Forest. Absolutely. They understand who's who and who's got a name and who's got talent, and they're well read and they know who's out there, and so they can rate the games. But these guys have played in playoff games, national championship games, ACC games that mattered more late in the season, ACC championship games. Say what you will about Texas A&M. They played a tight one 2 years ago in Kyle Field at night. They've played bigger games than against Miami. But this shows up on their radar, I think, is, okay, this team comes in at 3-0. We know they got talent. This is a game. This is a team we got to take seriously. But for Miami, yeah, this is the world. This is the biggest game that any of these players have played in. There's no question about it. This team did nothing. They were completely off the radar last year and the year before in the conference race. They lost 5 games in 7 games, 6 games in 7 games, 13 games the last 2 years. They played no important games.
Yeah. So we'll get Miami's best shot. I have no doubt about that. Clemson is one of these teams like Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, the LSUs of the world. They get everybody's best shot. And I have no doubt that Miami will give Clemson their best shot. Can their best shot be good enough? If Clemson plays the way that Clemson normally plays, I think Clemson comes out on top here. If Miami comes out with their hair on fire and Clemson somehow finds themselves in a situation where they're down at the half or sometime in the second half, then it will be it'll be a scary situation for Clemson. But look, this line opened up at 14.5. I think it's up to 15.5 now, depending on which line you're looking at. I think that's about right. I mean, this might be a really hard game to judge what the spread will be. I'm certainly not going to touch it. I predicted it would open around 16, so I wasn't that far off. What do you think about the line on that?
Well, I know that I like it to stay over 14. So if it can, that's pretty key, that it can stay over 14. I'm not playing games. I'm just making predictions this year. Maybe I'll dabble in that later. I typically do from the start. But yeah, for a prediction standpoint, the way I'm leaning right now would be I would want that line to stay over 14. That helps my chances in terms of where my prediction is leaning in terms of the point spread, in terms of the actual winner of the game. If they both come out and play an A game, Clemson wins. If they both come out and play a B game, Clemson wins, et cetera, et cetera. Clemson's got to come out and play like a C+, B-, and Miami's got to stud out as an A+ to win the game. They've got to play a better game. Clemson is a better team. And I made this statement a couple of weeks ago that unless something that I cannot foresee happens in this game, even if Miami walks off the field a 37-34 winner, I'm going to still believe that Clemson's a better team. Now, some people argue with that, and they're like, what are you talking about? The other team just won. I get that. We credit the team that won the game. But college football and sports in general are littered with contests every year where there's no reason to believe, and then it factors out and it proves itself out by the end of the year that the best team doesn't always win that particular night. Usually, of course, they do 90% of the time. But unless I am just blown away by Miami's performance, I'm going to still believe that Clemson's a better team, that they had to kind of give the game away.
I have some bad news for Miami fans. I have been to, 30, 40, I lost count, games in Death Valley in my lifetime. I have never attended a Clemson game in Death Valley and watched my Tigers lose, and I'll be there this weekend. So sorry about your luck. I'm the good luck charm.
I guess. And so we're going back how far? In the last 5 years, that wouldn't be a big deal. But
back to the mid-'80s when I was a kid. Yeah. I have never seen the Tigers lose at home in person.
All those Furman and Citadel games.
No, I've been to some good games. Been to some good ones. Yeah. The last one, the last big one I was at was in 2015 against Notre Dame. We saw how that turned out. Sure. I've been to one or two every year since then, but mostly against the, Georgia Tech, Boston College, whatever, stuff like that. Wilkie, thank you, sir. Says if Miami wins this weekend, they will be competing for 5th in the ACC. Oh, I didn't say that. He did. All right, so moving on from Miami and Clemson, we'll have plenty more to talk about that on my YouTube channel, and I'm sure over where Mark's doing his thing all week long. This is going to be a fun week, I can already tell. Georgia and Tennessee. I think this is a great matchup. Now, I think Georgia's the better team, and it's not really even close. Tennessee had a convincing win over a bad Missouri team. But again, the game was never in doubt. They pretty much owned the game from start to finish. It was never even a contest. The problem is Georgia, in my opinion, has by far the best defense in the country. And I think by the look on your face, you look like you agree with me.
It about looks like it.
Jarrett Garantano is very all right. So he hasn't turned the ball over this year, I don't think. That's one plus. But his stat line is like 190 yards, 200 yards from week in to week out, one touchdown, no picks, which is great. But that's not exactly lighting the world on fire. And if you're putting up those numbers against average defenses, what are you going to put up against a Georgia defense? This is a big problem for Tennessee. Tennessee can run the football. They've shown that. And they play really, obviously their offensive line's elite. And they can play really good defense. I think to beat a team like Georgia, though, as good as that defense is, you have to have a guy that can score a lot of points through the air. And they don't appear to have that.
Georgia completely shut down Auburn, and Auburn is not going to sell us as a great offense the rest of the season. But Auburn's one of these teams that has top 10 or 15 talent on offense, but it just doesn't, it's kind of dysfunctional. Bo Nix is still developing, but still, they're not going to go out and have any issue scoring a lot more than 6 points against anybody, including Alabama. They're going to be scoring in the 20s against good teams and in the 40s against the bad teams in the SEC, if there are any of those. So what Georgia did to Auburn was completely dominate the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball and ring up about 450 yards, playing a very conventional offense, just turn around.
They're playing the Georgia offense. That's how Georgia.
It looked like the Georgia offense.
Yeah.
And Stetson Bennett looks like Jake Fromm. And I'm not saying that I'm not dissing either one of them by making that statement, but I'm also saying he's not dynamic. But maybe Georgia doesn't need a dynamic quarterback with the running game, the weapons on the outside, and the defense. But Stetson Bennett is going to play Jake Fromm. He's going to not make mistakes. He's making the right decisions. He's throwing the ball on time, and he's throwing it on the receiver. He looks good, but he's not
look good.
A transcendent quarterback.
No. The question is, this is nothing new for Georgia. So what's the word on JT Daniels here? Right? Because it's hard to bench Bennett if he's winning you games, right? So where are we going with this quarterback situation here? I think that from what I know, and Kirby Smart doesn't say a lot, I think he's high on JT Daniels and he wants that to be his number one guy. But again, Stetson Bennett's out there getting it done, not turning the ball over, winning games, running the offense proficiently, whether it's not flashy, but it's proficient. What do you do?
He's doing as much with it as you can in his position. Now, if he would have thrown 2 picks and gone 9 for 20, they still would have won that game by 2 scores.
Right.
But there would have been justification for pulling him and saying, okay, he's having some issues. He's not having issues. He's not setting the world on fire, but he's not been given that kind of rope, and they don't need to give him that kind of rope. And they can go out against Tennessee, and Tennessee's probably not as good as Auburn. They're probably in that same range. And so Tennessee's definitely taken strides, because for them to have notched a win on the road in the SEC against South Carolina, come back, beat Missouri handily, not struggle and screw around and win 24-21, that's definitely an upgrade from what Tennessee's done for the last 12 or 13 years. But are they ready for Georgia? Probably not. Are they going to make it a game? We shall see. I believe that they're going to make it a game for most of the way. And the style of play that Georgia is going to fall into is going to help them stay in the game.
I see a Tennessee having a hard time scoring.
Yeah.
In this game. The line's 13.5. I'll have to think about that a little bit more. I don't know. The over-under, I think, is really low because they don't expect either one of these teams to be scoring 40s in the 40s. So anyway, I'm picking Georgia to win this game simply based on that they clearly have so far this year the most dominant defense in the country. It's really Georgia defensively and then everybody else. I mean, even Alabama's defense is great, but it doesn't look as dominant as Georgia's does.
Until Ohio State steps on the field, and we'll see and be able to judge them. Yeah, but based on the teams that we've seen, I was making the same comments in the last couple of days. So I'm right there with you that Georgia, shoot, I've got them ranked number 1.
Yeah.
Do I think they're the best team in the country? No, there's a difference between that. So
I can't wait to see Georgia. I can't wait to see Georgia and Florida play, because that's going to be a high-flying offense with a great quarterback. And Trask he's great. He's playing great this year against a dominant defense. That'll be must-watch TV. But I think Georgia comes out on top this week, and I'll obviously talk more about that later. Alabama and Ole Miss. This is interesting because it's Lane Kiffin playing against the team that he used to coach for, and his mentor there, and Nick Saban, if that's what you want to call him. Does anybody know more about how things are run at Alabama than Kiffin does? No. He spent several years there, right? Played in big games. Now, there's a clear talent gap here. I'm not, for anybody who's thinking I'm suggesting that Ole Miss is going to beat Alabama, I'm certainly not. But I do think this game could be interesting, at least for the first half, or maybe even 3 quarters.
There was a point during that Alabama-Texas A&M game when it was 14-14. Not that I thought it was going to be, because it was 14-14, going to be 35-31. But I thought, okay, is Alabama going to show us that they've got similar problems to when the defense was a bit leaky last year? But that was just a flurry out of Texas A&M. That was a turnover. There was a batted pass for an interception that played into that, and a couple busted coverages from Alabama, and suddenly it was 14-all. Ole Miss is showing us that they're better on offense than Texas A&M, even with less overall roster talent. I can't see this. I'm having flashbacks to about 3 years ago. They were playing at Ole Miss. Ole Miss comes out, and I'm trying to think of the 2 players' names that they had on. DK Metcalf would be one wide receiver, and then the other wide receiver who's playing in the league right now. They have 2 NFL wide receivers. They hit one of them. First play of the game. Place is going crazy. Alabama's number 1. Ole Miss had won a couple of decent games early, so they were happy, 2-0, 2-1, something like that. They hit Metcalf, or might have been Van Jefferson before he went to Florida. Anyway, they hit one of them. First play of the game, 75 yards, right down the sideline. He burns his man, a really good corner, like one of the Alabama corners. 75-yard touchdown, first play of the game. The place is going crazy. Final score 59-7. Like that only got Alabama mad.
Yeah, right. The spread's 24 points, so Vegas thinks this is a lopsided matchup, and it is. I mean, talent-wise, there's really nothing close there. I do think that Kiffin's going to have a few tricks up his sleeve this week. I think you're going to see several trick plays. Now, their trick plays are what they are. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but it can be the difference in keeping the game at least interesting for a little while. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm just looking for. I have a feeling this game's going to get away from Ole Miss in the fourth quarter. I'm just looking for a good 2 to 3 quarters of competitive football, and maybe some mistakes made, a turnover or 2 made on Alabama's side, and Lane Kiffin capitalize on it just to keep it interesting.
Be happy with 2.
2.
Be happy with the one half there. Yeah. They just scored 52 against A&M.
I know.
I think this could be, if Alabama really wants to, I think it could be like 62-24. Like Ole Miss is going to score some points just because they've got speed and playmakers, but Alabama is really good defensively.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know if I would touch this line at 24. Anyway, Alabama on top. All right, we have time to go over one more, Mark.
Heck yeah.
All right. Well, there's actually 2 more on my list, but we're going to skip Florida State and Notre Dame. But that's not a contest, is it?
No.
All right, good.
It better not be. Notre Dame's in trouble if it is.
Notre Dame is only a 21-point favorite. I'm thinking I'm going to take Notre Dame with the against.
You would think.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Florida State's bad. Florida and Texas A&M. Speaking of Texas A&M. Now, this is the game. This is the lock of the week as far as I'm concerned. We talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the show. 6 points. I don't know what it is now. It might be up to 6.5 or 7 by now. I got it at 6. Florida is only a 6-point favorite against Jimbo and A&M. Is this the week that Kellen Mond shows up and plays, because he does at least once or twice a year. He shows up and looks like he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. But then the other 8 to 10 games, he looks like Jarrett Garantano. So are we going to see Jarrett Garantano Kellen Mond this week, or are we going to see the elite guy who's out there making every throw on the field?
I'm going to say let's make a distinction between the Texas A&M team that's on the field this year versus the program and what we expect there, meaning that Jimbo Fisher is being paid to win a national championship at Texas A&M, and he ain't getting it done right now. He just showed us last week that despite these great recruiting rankings and this being his 3rd year, and I'm not saying get rid of the guy, usher him out of town, but man, they got a long way to go. But let's separate that from the team, meaning I think that last week's game might tell us more about Alabama's dominance than it does about Texas A&M being inept. Think back to 2 years ago, LSU finished with 10 wins. They won the Peach Bowl. They finished in the top 10, like number 7 in the country. Joe Burrow, before Joe Burrow, 60 touchdown Joe Burrow, Alabama won that game 29-0, gave up like 100 yards of offense. Like Alabama, since Saban elevated them to dominance up until just the last year or two, and figure they were playing with a backup quarterback through most of their important games down the stretch last year after Tua got hurt. They only lost to LSU by 5 with Tua, but they were like a pick 6 away from possibly making a playoff. Still, that basically Alabama was so good during all that time that you almost couldn't judge the other good teams in the SEC, because Florida, Texas A&M, Auburn, LSU, they play each other, Georgia, and they play really good games, and they were top 10 to 15 teams. Then they play Alabama, and most of the time they just get run over. And if that game happened early in the season, we were like, well, that team sucks. No, they didn't. You know, a few weeks later, they're beating Auburn and Florida, and they're finishing 10-2, 9-3, and they're one of the, they're number 9 in the country. And so I'm just going to hold back on just laying waste to Texas A&M, because I think Alabama might be that good.
I think both can be true, though, because we have a 2-game sample now, and we saw A&M struggle against Vanderbilt.
True.
So that did happen.
Yep.
I think Alabama is that good. I also think A&M's really not very good at all. Right? Both things can be true. I mean, look, when's the last time A&M, just over the past 2 seasons, A&M played 5 ranked teams in 2019, lost all 5 of them. Then they played a ranked team this last weekend, albeit it's one of the best ranked teams. I mean, a dominant Alabama.
The ranked teams they're playing are Clemson, Georgia, LSU, Alabama.
But again, going back to what you said, that's the $80 million. You got to win at least one of those. I'm not
sure
saying
you do.
Win all
if we're judging the program and Jimbo's job, yeah. But if we're just judging this game coming up this week,
I mean, Florida's a top 5 team right now.
Well, that's the ranking.
Well, okay. You don't think, as far as the teams that are playing in college football right now, that they're top 5?
I've got them ranked that high. I've got them number 4, I believe.
So there you go. So you have them that high too,
based on their results.
Based on the results.
Yes.
So based on A&M's results so far this year, which have been abysmal, and Florida's, which have been pretty good, 6 points to me is a ridiculous line. But again, there's always a reason for the line being the way it is. The people in Vegas are a lot smarter than me and you. That's the reason they have all the hotels and casinos out there. So I do feel like this could be some sort of a trap. There's got to be a reason for this line being this low. It's almost like they're inviting people to take the 6, like schmucks like me. So
I agree with you. On the surface, the way A&M is played and the way Florida's played, and the home field being diminished, and it's only 1 score. It's like it could be a really good game. A&M could play better than they have the last 2 weeks, and it's 31 all in the 4th quarter. Florida scores a touchdown, they cover. Ball game. That's not much, 6. Now, over the course of time, when you look at, and betting, if you're looking at 1,000 games, 6 points is significant because there's a lot of 2s and 3s out there. But for one game, you could be playing a great game, and all of a sudden 6 gets wiped out. Florida could beat them by 2 touchdowns, and it was a great game until 4 minutes left.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it should be 11.
I was going to say somewhere around 13 and a half, 14.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you, Slim Shady Kent. I forgot to mention your super chat from earlier. What he said, and I don't have it up, but I know what he said. He said basically he's a rational Miami fan, and he has been saying that if Miami can keep it within 14 points by the end of the game, then he feels like that's good enough for them to compete in the ACC championship later in the year. And I 100% agree with that.
Yep.
And then Wilkie follows up with, can you just take that SSC super chat down? Tired of looking at that. He was talking about Slim Shady Canes. Oh, that's what SSC stands for. Slim Shady Canes. Okay. So we're using abbreviations here. So I obliged you and took it down for you, sir. Thank you. All right. So that's going to wrap up the show for the day. Thank you all the people that joined us for College Football Coast to Coast episode 4. And I know we'll have a great show next week, Mark, because I'll be coming home either tattered and bruised, licking my wounds from Death Valley, or I'll be triumphant wearing my crown, and I will brag for the first 15 minutes of the show. We'll see how that all works out. I'm cool with either way. Any final thoughts you have before we get off here today?
Well, the games keep getting better and better. Last week was the first week I really struggled to find, to determine what I was going to watch. That we're starting to get those stacks of games. Even at noon this week, at noon, we've got Florida, Texas A&M, Texas, Oklahoma, and there's one other game in there that's really good, and I can't remember which one it is. There's like 3 really good games at noon. So I was like, wow. So we're starting to get into college football, and every week unveils another. A lot of people keep asking me about teams, and I'm like, I don't know yet. Miami fans should feel good that they did to Louisville what they should do to Louisville, and much more than any of us anticipated they would. And to Florida State, you got to play the game. So even though we discredit Florida State, the game's on the schedule, and you didn't beat them by 13. You annihilated them. Feel good about what you're doing, and you got a quarterback, but I just don't know if you're ready for this game. We'll see.
I agree with you. Bunch of great games this week, and a bunch of great games coming up next week, which we will preview and review on College Football Coast to Coast. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a great show. See you later, Mark.